Now wait, Michael, is this the best that you can do? In my hands, I grasped the page of smudged and scribbled writing, barely legible and barely readable. I didn't need to read past the first 2 paragraphs to know that it was garbage. This is 11th grade English, buddy. Your writing should be leagues better than this. I tried to continue the story, but decided not to over fear of losing all respect for the daft young man that stood in front of me. "Oh, come on, sir," he whined. "This is English studies. This is the class we elected so we didn't have to put any effort in." He tried to weasel his way out of doing work, like he always did. Every day. And I was sick of it. And come to think of it, I didn't have a whole lot of respect left for the boy anyways. "Michael, I don't care if this is standard English, advanced English, extension English, or English studies. So long as I'm your teacher, you will put in the correct amount of effort. Now take this story back to your desk, throw it out, and rewrite me something that isn't absent of character development and a decent plot." "I don't give one fuck, sir." "Excuse me, Michael, but that language is... I'm only going to be a mechanic when I leave the school anyway. Why do I have to be able to write good stories?" "Michael, please. Sit down," I yelled. "Wow, sir, I thought you were almost going to tell me to shut the fuck up." Michael gleamed as the students around him chuckled. "Michael, the language is not... Because we all know that my father would love to hear how I'm getting verbally abused by my English teacher," he interrupted. "That would be quite the scene at the parent-teacher interviews tonight." The class went quiet. Michael's father was just as much of a loose cannon and had a well-earned reputation for having violent outbursts. I swallowed my pride and put on a fake smile just for the shit of a kid that stood in front of me. "Now I'm sure your father and I will have a lovely conversation about your progress in class and your attitude towards learning. Now I'll reinstate the fact that your story deserves a place in the bin more so than a moldy apple. So sit down, write a decent story, and shut up for some time." Michael, obviously disappointed at the fact that he couldn't intimidate me, did exactly as I asked of him. "Remember our writing tools, Michael. Please be careful." I motioned to a massive poster prominent on the wall beside the whiteboard. "Concise. Make your point clear. Articulate. Express ideas without unnecessary ramble. Realistic. In relations to the actions of the characters. Emotive. Make the reader care about your characters. Foolproof. Dig no plot holes. Ensure plot comes full circle. Unhackneyed. Be original. Literate. Make sure spelling and grammar is correct." I was proud of it, but it seemed my class paid no attention to it. And that's the regular lesson in 11th grade English studies at Bowral High School. Granted, English study was a non-ATAR subject, so there were no exams, and everyone who elected the subject was either planning to drop out, too lazy to do work, or generally stupid. I was supposed to be teaching advanced and extension English, but it was my first year working here, and the staff weren't too keen on letting a newcomer take the reins over a well-performing class. So, I got stuck with the daft kids, where every lesson was comparable to teaching a primary school class, as opposed to a bunch of young adults. It disappointed me greatly, but I had some semblance of hope that I could at least get through to my students' parents at the upcoming parent-teacher interviews that evening. All the interviews went well, and I met a range of parents and personalities. Some parents took their children's learning more seriously than I do, and some parents were less enthusiastic about their children's learning than their children were. However, there was a last-minute booking which made me stay later than I had anticipated. Max McGinnis, Michael's father. Whilst I hate to admit it, I was a little nervous. His reputation preceded him, and I didn't want to ruin my first year in a new job by fighting with the parents of my students. Eventually, I convinced myself all would be well, and that Max wouldn't possibly be the monster that my fellow colleagues had described him to be. I was reviewing Michael's homework when his father entered. The man paced like a predator. Each step was methodical and meaningful. His clothes were well worn, but tattered to a degree that almost made them fashionable. His head consisted of thick dark hair that slicked back over his scalp and hung to his shoulders. His hair continued down onto his face in the form of a beard, which concealed all but the menacing eyes that fixated on me, as if I were his prey. His chiseled nose that twitched ever so slightly, as if he had picked up on the scent of my aftershave and freshly dry-cleaned clothes. With a big smile on his face, he extended his paw-like hand to shake mine and said, "Well, good day, Mr. Tyrell." The man spoke in such a kind and gentle voice it took me by surprise. I met his hand with mine, and we shook cordially. I always tell my students to not judge a book by its cover. Somewhat it seems as if I failed to follow my own advice. The man's personality was the exact opposite of what his physical appearance displayed. He was friendly, happy, and just an absolute joy to be around. When questioned about his son's reprimandable behavior, he seemed disappointed. "Well, I'm sorry, buddy. His mom passed a few years ago and I'm working constantly on my farm. I just don't see him that much. He used to be a good kid with a lot of potential, but I've left him on his own for too long. I guess he grieves in his own way. I don't know where his respect has gone, and I don't know where his motivation has gone. But I will find it, and I'll bring it back to him." Max sighed to himself, as if he knew his attempts would only be in futility. "Well, he just needs to think about his future, and how his present actions and attitudes could impact him outside of this school," I said. "I actually grew up on a farm myself. I worked with my family on one until I saved enough money to go to the university." Max's eyes seemed to lighten up. "Whereabouts did you live?" "A small cattle farm in the Riverina. Nothing too big, but there's a bit of money to be made out of Angus beef." "You do much hunting?" Max asked, his interest growing, his attitude rising once again, the happy man I met only moments before. "Well, not since I lived here," I replied. "So much land out here to hunt on, but it's all privately owned. But I don't know anyone who owns property, though." "Well, you know me," he said smugly. "I'd be glad to take you out hunting. Michael will be furious, but honestly, I don't give a shit. Damn, it'd probably help the little rascal pull his head in." I laughed nervously. It didn't seem to be a good idea to fraternize with the parents of my students. I couldn't impose on you." "Oh, bullshit. You aren't imposing. I go out hunting every weekend anyway. You're new in town. You gotta make friends and have fun. Work can be bloody stressful at times, can't it? You need a release. You can't pass it up." I sat there silently for a few seconds, pondering whether to take him up on his offer. I had been in town for a few months now, and it was hard to find time to make friends outside of work. Ultimately, I decided it was a good idea. What's the worst that could happen? "All right, sure. What day is good for you?" "Well, tomorrow night," Max replied. "I was hoping to go out and find some meat tomorrow evening. Would be a lot more exciting with some company." "That's good," I said. "Whereabouts do you go hunting? Where do you want me to meet you?" "We have a little spot just outside the Belangolo State Forest," Max said. I felt a shudder of dread run up my spine. That kind that makes you queasy and send tingles through your face and hands. I had to readjust my position in the chair just to feel comfortable enough to continue the conversation. "Is that good with you?" Max asked, obviously seeing that I was a bit shaken. "No, it's fine. I said. Just a bit of an ironic place to go hunting.
All that shit happened years ago, mate.
Max barked. His voice raised a little and he got visibly frustrated.
And don't tell me you're scared of an incarcerated serial killer.
His voice raised a little more this time, almost aggressive. No, I stuttered. I was taken aback by a sudden change of tone. Maybe I deserved it, digging up old wounds that the town was obviously trying to bury and forget. That was immature of me. My apologies, Max. I'm happy to come out. Max smiled, and he returned to his happy and bubbly self.
That's great, mate.
We followed up with a little more small talk and information on where to meet and what time. I was kind of excited, but also a little nervous. The thing is, Belangolo State Forest is the site of a number of grisly serial murders committed by Australia's most prolific serial killer, Ivan Milat. Ivan Milat was the inspiration for the frankly terrible film Wolf Creek. In real life, he was the killer of 7 backpackers between the years between 1989 and 1993. He would pick them up, kill them, and bury their mutilated corpses in Belangolo State Forest. It is theorized that he hunted a number of his victims through the forest as if they were animals. In prison, he cut off his own little finger with a plastic knife with the intent of mailing it to the High Court. He was, and still is, a terrifying individual. Ivan Milat is in prison, but it's no doubt that his legacy still remains here. They could lock away the killer, but they can't shelter the community from what has already been done. It's obvious that the little town still laments their infamy. So yes, I felt a little uncomfortable with going to a place in which 7 or more people were murdered to spill even more blood, even if it was just the blood of some animals. Nevertheless, come Saturday evening, I cleaned my rifle, sighted it in, and took off to Belangolo State Forest. I pulled my car off the road, parking close to the tree line out of sight. We'd organized to meet at the entrance to the state forest, where I assumed we would then travel to Max's nearby farmland. I hadn't been parked for long before Max creeped up behind me, parking his car directly behind mine.
"Woo, let's go kill something,"
he yelled excitedly from the window of his blue Ford F-250. The spotlight shone brightly into the darkness, showing the sign as clear as it would be during the day. It read, "Welcome to Belangolo State Forest," and a smaller additional sign underneath the official welcome. The words read, "Please be careful." The words seemed to burn their way into my eyelids, and each time the bright glare of Max's high beams flickered into my pupils, and I closed my eyes, I could still see the words, "Please be careful." It was ironic. I was spooked by a sudden bump as my car door was flung open by a figure from outside. It was Max.
"Well, what are you waiting for, mate? Sunrise?" He laughed. "Get your weapon out, and we'll make our way in to find some game."
"Wait," I said. "Isn't hunting in the state forest illegal?"
"Well, that just makes it exciting,"
Max said gladly.
"But worse things have happened in here. Let's go."
I was a little uneasy about breaking the law, but Belangolo was a massive forest, and the chances of a ranger or the authorities finding us were slim to none. And plus, I'd be lying if I said I hadn't shot in a national forest before. I did grow up in rural NSW. We trekked further into the bush, not saying much to each other as we keenly looked out for something to shoot. Moonlight shone through the treetops and patches, illuminating the shrubs. It was darkly beautiful. If I'd been alone, it might have even been scary.
"Now where in the hell are you going?"
Max called from behind me. Somehow in my wanderlust I'd continued on despite Max stopping.
"I had a fox in my scope, you fool. I was about to pull the trigger before you stepped into my sights."
"Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't..."
Well, out here you need to be a lot more careful. Bad situational awareness can cost you your life.
Max huffed as he stormed past me and headed further into the thicket.
I was unnerved by Max's hostility, but I tried not to think too much about it. My creative mind tends to wander, and I would just incessantly get myself worked up over it. Maybe he had some kind of disagreement with his friends, or they got too distracted by a personal emergency or something. There were plenty of reasons why my inquisitiveness could have upset him. It's nights like this, Max began. The full moon usually means our odds of finding anything go down.
That's disappointing, I sighed.
But you'd think that the full moon wouldn't affect the conditions much in here, especially when the canopy blocks out most of the moonlight.
Max grunted.
I think things could be a lot different if that moonlight was shining down on us. It's a shame I spent all afternoon cleaning and sighting in my rifle to come out here and find nothing.
I laughed. Well, even if we don't find something, we could come out another night.
Well, that depends if you make it back.
Max muttered coldly under his breath. Again, Max's hostility was off-putting. He didn't seem like the same person I met the night before. It freaked me out a little. It wasn't just his demeanor anymore. It was the whole situation. The atmosphere felt primal and aggressive. Here were two grown men who weren't getting along very well, in a dark forest with loaded guns, where people had previously been murdered. It was just a bad combination. It made me feel uneasy, and I quickly found myself brainstorming excuses to leave. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and pretended to look at a message.
You know what, Max?
I'm hopeless.
Well, that's right, he chuckled.
I forgot that I made plans with my partner tonight. We were supposed to be seeing a movie at 10 this evening.
Well, looks like he's going to be disappointed, but you can't go back now.
What in the hell are you talking about? I asked, agitated. Bang! Max fired his gun into the woods. I couldn't see his intended target, but I knew he had hit something.
Because we just got our first kill, Max laughed. This is the moment we've been waiting for. Come on, mate, let's go.
Mood swings again. Max had immediately switched back to his outgoing and cheerful self. I trudged quietly over to the corpse that sat at Max's feet. A kangaroo. My own country's national emblem was dead at my feet in the decomposing leaf litter that it would now become a part of.
I've been wanting a nice juicy leg I could take home to my pups, Max said cheerfully as he unsheathed his knife and started sewing the leg off of the kangaroo. Warm blood gushed from the wound and spilled onto the cold ground, steaming as it did. The dead creature twitched with nerves as Max twisted and pulled, eventually dislocating the leg from its socket and removing the hunk of flesh completely before casually swinging it over his shoulder. Amidst the red mess on the ground, a pink organism was writhing. Slowly it crawled from the pouch and made itself visible on the ground. A baby kangaroo, so young it was absent of fur. Well, isn't that lovely?
Max laughed. He walked over to the baby Joey and stomped it into the dirt, dragging it along the ground with his foot after every stomp, as if trying to clean mud off the bottom of his boots. It tore the fragile carcass to pieces. Max could go on by himself. I was giving up the hunt with this sadistic monster. I was going home.
Max, that was too far. Why the hell would you do that?
I asked. He stared at me for a second and kept trudging onwards without a word.
Excuse me, Max,
I asked again, this time a little louder. No response.
Max,
I yelled, and that caught his attention. He stopped in his tracks and stood motionless for a few seconds before he slowly turned around to face me. His face was blank of all expression, like a corpse. He breathed heavily, and the corners of his mouth moved ever so slightly upwards, forming a smile. The same fake smile he had shown me at the parent-teacher interviews. Then he spoke.
"Who is Max?" he asked cordially. Startled, my mind started to race. I mean, surely this was a joke. "You are Michael's father," I said calmly, acting as if it was all a prank, some sick joke to scare me, teach me some sort of lesson for giving his son a hard time in school. His crooked smile contorted in disgust, barely visible through his thick beard. "And who the fuck is Michael?" he asked. "All right, I don't know what game you're playing, but I think it's high time I went home." I was now scared. There was something wrong. The temperature, the atmosphere, the unknown man standing in front of me. It was all off, as if there was something out of place. I turned and made my way back the way we came, secretly flipping the safety switch off of my weapon. "Please be careful," the man said. I turned my head to get a glimpse of him. He stood in the exact same position in the shrub, unmoving, staring at me as I made my way out of sight. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself as I made my way through the forest. I whispered it over and over again. I don't understand how I was fooled, how I didn't notice something was inhuman from the beginning. The way his personality was the exact opposite of what all the teachers described him as. The way he showed complete and utter disregard for his son, describing him as if he were a weight on his shoulders and nothing more. The way how father and son looked so impossibly different from one another. The late booking to the interviews, as if to maintain his ruse as the boy's father, knowing most teachers who would identify him would have left. His strength, as if there was no holding back, and his disgusting personality. The skill to manipulate me so well into leading me out here. This guy wasn't a parent. He was a psychopath. Suddenly, the cracking of leaf litter could be heard ahead of me, followed by a loud puffing sound, similar to the panting of a dog. I aimed my gun into the brush, my flashlight illuminating what was only an empty space. Again, the crunch was heard, this time from behind me. The breathing was louder, closer, and I could feel its warm dog-like breath steaming down my neck. "Please be careful," it said in a husky voice. I turned to face my enemy before being thrown hard onto the ground, dropping my weapon into the shrubs. I didn't even think twice about it. I just got up and ran. The man chased me as if I were an animal, hunting me throughout the forest as if I were his prey. He had enough clearance to stop and shoot me if he wanted to, but he was toying with me, playing mind games like most serial killers do. I almost got the feeling he was leading me somewhere, trying to round me up into an area where he could live out his sick fantasy, execute his MO. Soon enough, my fears were confirmed as I crashed through the foliage and into a clearing. At that point, the pursuer stopped. The moonlight lit open the clearing to such a degree I could see through it as plain as day. The man stayed out of the moonlight, catching his breath, almost afraid to enter the clearing. The horror that sat adjacent to me stopped me in my tracks. Strewn about the clearing was a red graphic mess of flesh and bone, something that was once human. Limbs were separated from the body and sitting half-eaten and contorted into unnatural shapes. Intestines were splayed over the single tree that stood in the center of the clearing like a split tin of spaghetti. A mangled torso consisting of merely a ribcage and skin sat upright against the trunk of the tree, with the head strangely intact and untouched. It was Michael. A loud bang erupted from the gun behind me, and a sudden pain jolted through my knee. My kneecap exploded from the front of my leg, and blood sprayed across the grass in front of me. The hollow point round came fresh from a .30-06, and the bottom half of my leg held on to my thigh, but nothing but skin and tendons. I fell to the ground, screaming. Steam rose up from the chilly grass as my warm blood gushed out onto it. I screamed again, hoping that somebody, anybody would come and save me. But nobody would come. The forest was dead quiet between every scream I forced out. It was only a matter of time before I would be too. For now, it was just my severed leg and eyes sitting in a red mess. I turned my head slightly to face my killer as I lost control of my bladder. Max stepped out slowly into the opening. Just as the moonlight met his figure for the first time that evening, he dropped to his knees. A vicious scream left his mouth, piercing my ears and becoming more distorted and inhuman the longer it dragged on for. His body seemed to twist and grow, morphing into a monstrous shape. His buttoned flannel stretched and tore at the seams as the buttons popped off like shrapnel from a frag grenade. His muscles pulsated as they grew. His jeans and shoes shredded into ribbons and fell to the ground like confetti as his massive bulk outgrew the human-sized clothes. Tendons visibly tightened with each pull as his naked body gained more and more mass. His hair grew in a matter of seconds, becoming thick and matted like that of a wild creature, engulfing the entirety of his form. Its skull seemed to twitch around, cracking and crunching, deforming grotesquely as it did so. The lower face and jaw seemed to grow and stretch outwards before settled into a horrid feature that could only be described as the snout of a dog. Its eyes shifted further apart from each other, irises growing exponentially until the eyeball became a black void. And one by one the beast's teeth began to come loose, falling into a chunky bloody mess on the cold earth as canines and incisors burst from the gums in their stead. The hands contorted awkwardly as the bones seemed to outgrow the skin, bursting through the fingertips in a meaty mess, forming abominable clawed features. Joints snapped and popped as its knees and ankles simultaneously bent in the opposite directions, adopting a canine-like stance. Once its transformation was complete, it looked toward the sky and screamed. As it made its way towards me, I only wished that I hadn't been so daft. If only I hadn't come out here. If only I had been more careful.